And before moving to Bianca and Gabrielle, who will talk about Bianca's book, let's start with the Territorial Acknowledgement. Kwekakina, hello everyone, PG Chic, welcome. I'd like to acknowledge that St. Paul University is located on the traditional unceded territory of the Anishinaabe people. We would like to honor the Anishinaabe, the first peoples of the lands and water of the Kishisibi, Ottawa River Valley, from time immemorial. We acknowledge that the city of Ottawa serves as the home of the Anishinaabe, as a place for spiritual ceremonies, cultural gatherings, and exchanges among First Peoples. Today, this spirit of peace and friendship is the foundation of relationships among Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous people from around the globe. And so we are proud to present our colleague Bianca Briciu a new book called The Revolutionary Art of Love, From Romantic Love to Global Compassion. In her book, Bianca explores the transformative power of love. At the Providence School of Transformative Leadership and Spirituality, we research and create programs that reflect and enable personal and social transformation. During this holiday season, we thought it would be relevant for Bianca to speak on how we better understand love and unlock its potential for interconnectedness and wholeness. And so, just a few reminders before we start. So this conversation will be recorded in order to add it to our YouTube channel. We will be sending out the link after the event. If you would like to, you're most welcome to open your webcam, but only the speakers will appear on the recording. And so do not hesitate also to send your questions or reflections throughout the conversation using the chat. And we plan sometimes we hope a good 20-minute chunk at the end to discuss those questions and for Bianca to answer them. So you're most welcome into this conversation about the revolutionary power of love. And from now on, I will invite my colleague Gabrielle Dupuis to present our speaker for this afternoon.
Hello, I have the honor of presenting my dear colleague, Dr. Bianca Brito. She's an assistant professor for the Providence School of Transformative Leadership and Spirituality with a real interdisciplinary formation. She's studied film studies, gender studies, cultural mediation. Her deep curiosity has led her research on the cultivation of the human potential in all areas of intelligence, cognitive, embodied, emotional, and spiritual. Her belief in the human potential is an essential part of her teaching in the leadership development programs, from the academic to the professional programs, where she guides the learners through a greater sense of self-awareness, empathy, and compassion to transform themselves, communities, and society. We can see these same traits in her wonderful book, The Revolutionary Art of Love. To quote from the synopsis, the book's purpose is to deconstruct cultural myth about love, proposing instead a framework for understanding love's contribution to the well-being of individual and social system. The uniqueness of the book lies in its interdisciplinary scope, articulating love as a form of connection to the self, others, and the world in general. It examines its role in mental health, sexuality, emotional intelligence, and social responsibility. So today, we're very lucky to be able to explore these things with Bianca herself. Welcome.
Well, I wanted to say a very big thank you to my colleagues at the School of Transformative Leadership and Spirituality for their welcoming and nurturing spirit. It's such an honor to be here. And I also want to thank you all for joining us in this conversation. It's I feel this sort of really strong emotions right now in terms of seeing so many familiar faces gathered here for this purpose, and I'm very thankful to see everyone. So I would like Gabrielle to go ahead with your
your questions. Let's dive right in, because I think and really we'll only be able just to touch on the main themes of the book, but if you want to go more in depth, you'll have to read the book. That's the real scoop of the meeting today. But let's start. So first and foremost, when we think of love, such a interesting subject, and obviously it's captured the imagination in art, songs, film, and all this stuff, but it's maybe not seen as much as an academic subject. So I think it'd be really interesting to hear from you, Bianca, about how you became interested in studying love and its potential for everyone.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Well, I think that I've been always valuing this aspect of connection, and also the ethic of interconnectedness, and trying to find out ways in which we can, I would say, reduce that gap between our dreams of creating a loving society, our dreams of experiencing loving relationships, and finding fulfillment through connection, and that gap between the social systems that are actually not based on love, and in fact, and a lot of relationships that are not based in this ethic of care and love, which I think produces a lot of distress and suffering. And I think another purpose was, I was reflecting on how Michel Foucault wrote a lot about that association between knowledge and power. And for me, the question was, how can we talk about knowledge and love, and knowledge as a form of love? So I thought, oh, maybe if I understand love more, and I can speak about it and write about it, I will also be able to love more. So to go from knowing about love, right, from the concepts to opening that emotional space, and live more in the heart. And I think this is, I'm realizing that this is part of my, I would say, meaning, in a sense, right, that this connection between understanding the world and loving the world, understanding people and loving people. So I hope that this book helps people understand a little bit more what is love and what are relationships, and also I would say create those capacities that we all have to give and receive love. And in 2019, I created some courses in the community, teaching various aspects of love, love and attachment, love and compassion, love and sexuality. And I thought it's amazing that we have quite little knowledge about these things. We are supposed to know all about love when in fact we don't. So I think that this was another, purpose of writing the book.
Yeah, we take for granted that it's very intuitive, but yeah. And in all that you shared also, like I think I really hear, and I connect within what you said, but also in the book, that longing for connection, for wholeness. And I think within that, when there's the lack of that, there's a lot of suffering as well. And so whether it is in our relationship with others or with ourselves. And so in the first chapter, which I think is very important, you highlight the role that self-compassion can play in loving yourself better. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about like what developing self-compassion has been like for you, but also why this is kind of an important first step in your love journey, as we could say.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that self-compassion was a very big part. I would say it was a transformative process for me, because I used to see love for the self, or to associate that with narcissism, which is what a lot of people do. And as I was starting to study about self-compassion, and as I was starting to practice self-compassion, I realized that I was living the opposite experience of a very strong inner critic. And I was always feeling that I fell short of all my ideals, because I'm a very idealistic person, and I never seem to do the right thing, or to make the right changes, or to have the right impact. So it took a long process of, I would say, shadow work and development of self-compassion in order to start feeling at home in myself, and create that spaciousness that they talk about in Buddhist practice, which is that equanimity, or a sort of inner spaciousness where you can hold your positive and negative aspects without really falling under the weight of whatever you maybe don't appreciate in yourself. So it was, I would not say that it was an easy process, but it was a very important, it's almost like a basis, right? Like a groundwork that we need in order to develop our ability for love for others, you know, to start feeling at home with who we are and know and accept who we are.
Yes. So, a journey of a lifetime, I think, but such important. And I think this also touches on knowing and who you are. As the next chapter, you talk a lot about emotional intelligence, which is something that you've been working with for a long time. You're a coach in emotional intelligence and all these things. I think, but I think I'd be curious to hear through your own experience, what in working with people on emotional intelligence, what have you noticed is the hardest thing for people in developing emotional intelligence, or what some of the things that come up more often than others that maybe we can pay attention to? Yeah.
Well, that's a very interesting question, because in the book I write a lot about how love is associated with both positive and negative emotions, and it's difficult for us to understand the ways in which it is connected to negative emotions and how to disentangle it from that. But I noticed that in my work with coaching people and also with teaching emotional intelligence at the university, and I also want to highlight how thankful I am that that we have this course in our university. There are those 5 aspects of emotional intelligence, which are self-awareness, how well we know ourselves, how we express ourselves to others, how we connect to other people, the interpersonal dimension, the decision-making ability, and the stress management ability. And people tend to have different vulnerabilities in different areas according to their experience or their personalities or their values. What I noticed that was interesting was that there is a correlation between the level of self-awareness and the capacity for empathy. So the more people know themselves, the more they are able to know and accept others, which is that association between self-compassion and love for others, right? So because self-compassion comes with self-awareness. So the more they start understanding their vulnerabilities, the more they are able to see who they are, the more they are able to create that way of connecting with others that precludes judgment and rejection, because we usually reject what we don't understand, or we try to keep away from our inner system. And another thing that I noticed interesting was in terms of some gender differences. Most of my students are female, and most of people that I coached were females, but the majority of them had a very low self-regard, which for me was interesting, because I thought that says something about how we define our female identity and how women define themselves as women in our society. And I think there is something there that is still problematic even nowadays, that many women see themselves as caregivers, as taking care of others, and when they don't do that well, you know, there is a sense of, and it's impossible to do that well, right? We all know that people who work in caring jobs, they know how difficult it is to care for the well-being of others and so on. So I think that there is a sort of I would say self-judgment that is stronger with women, because they take responsibility for others maybe more than they need to in terms of that identity. So that was something that I noticed in the work with people. And for others, you know, they tend to be quite different in terms of their spaces that they need to work on.
And making me think that through this love framework, or the frameworks, you know, plural, that you're presenting, that we can try to find a way to better manage that, like, self-identity of who we are, but also how we are in relationship with other people, that we keep that balance, right? About our individual and also relationship with others. Yeah, and speaking of a relationship with others, the next chapter talks really in a very specific way about that, but also again a relationship to ourselves. It comes back. You talk about you really bring together a discussion around sexuality, love, and mental health. I think something that maybe not, as you yourself have pointed out, not a lot of people discuss this all together, and so I think it would be really relevant to kind of present your definition of what you name as erotic intelligence, but also its relationship to love and mental health. And obviously we can't go over the whole chapter, but if you want to anything that you want to highlight here in our discussion.
I appreciate your question, because I think that I was a little bit concerned, doing gender studies in how these subjects are usually separated. We either write about an emotion, right, which is love, or we write about sexuality, and usually these topics are treated in different ways. So I started wondering, what is the place where these two come together? Because in our love stories, right, in our myths, at least the myths about romantic love, there is that association between what we call healthy sexuality and love. And when I was reflecting on this idea of sexuality, I thought that what we define as sexuality seems to be quite disconnected from our ideals, right? Or at least the reality of the way sexuality is constructed and experienced in our world tends to stray away from what we seem to desire, at least in our stories and myths. So I see sexuality as our capacity for embodied freedom, pleasure, and connection with the other, right? So usually that happens in a romantic relationship. So this human capacity that we all have has been distorted, and there are studies that denounce patriarchy as being at fault and other forms of domination, but it has been colonized in a way and diverted to other purposes, for procreation, for male domination, for the subjugation of the female body, and also the subjugation of nature. Some feminist theorists make this relationship between the subjugation of the female body and the exploitation of nature. So in these systems, that capacity of the body for pleasure and openness and connection with others is really distorted, and it reaches what I called, the dark side that we see in our systems of exploiting sexuality in various forms. So in the book, I was trying to find a framework in which love and sexuality converge, so if we define love as, and this is Erich Fromm's definition, which I really like because it's very integrative in a way. So he defines love as that capacity to care for the life and growth of that which we love. So I was thinking, if we see love that way, how can we see sexuality as the care for the capacity of the body to experience pleasure and the capacity of the other person's body? So erotic intelligence is about cultivating and accessing intentionally that potential of the body. And that means that we will need to unlearn a lot of things that we actually embody. And this is what is fascinating about this area of erotic intelligence, is that it requires the work of undoing so many ideologies that we grew up with, the shame about sexuality, the correlation of sexuality with sin, and so many other ideas that we have about sexuality that we need to. So it's about going through that process. It's almost like diving into something and unearthing a lot of things in order to discover that potential, and that also requires a lot of work, I would say. But it is about the ability to decolonize the body in some sense. So that's what I see in the concept of erotic intelligence, because it opens up that freedom of the body to feel, to sense, and the freedom of the imagination to imagine things, and not to be constricted by our negative associations that we make connected to our sexuality. So I'm wondering if I should go on to talk about mental health, or will that be a next question?
It's the next question, but I think maybe just to stay here for a little bit, I think what you're inviting us to in this framework really is, which people might not, I think it's creativity and exploration really at the end of the day, but there's also a lot of work behind it too, as you mentioned, with the deconstructing and diving into. And so I think it would be maybe, as you mentioned in the book, important to note too, that if you are going to do that work, that, there are people that can help with that work too, that it's, in some cases important to be accompanied through that work, because it can be, we don't know what we can find once we start uncovering those things, but I think it's definitely, if it's possible, a worthy journey. And yeah, the next, I think it's come up a couple of times through your different responses, but yeah, I think within sexuality, but also in general with the importance of, again, what you are doing in this book is bringing a lot of things together. And so love and mental health, I think you've done a lot of work on that. And I think it'd be really interesting to know, because sometimes, like you said, in caring, compassion, relationships or whatever, we see a need to be distant, or to create a wall between us and what we're doing, because we don't want to exhaust ourselves, or we don't want. So where can we actually see love as a positive and negative to our mental health? I think it would be interesting to hear more about that.
Yeah, that's interesting to reflect on the positive and negative aspects where we connect love to mental health. So I'll start with this idea that exists in some forms of indigenous knowledge, that a lot of people's suffering come from disconnection, from the spirit, and disconnection from others. And this idea of isolation, because one of our fundamental needs as humans is to feel connected to others, to feel connected to nature, to feel connected to the spirit. And what happens when, and apparently we are all born with this capability. There are many studies of developmental psychology that show that we are equipped with that capacity to be connected, that can get undermined as a result of various experiences, and especially primary experiences of attachment with parents. So the dysregulation, the problematic relationships that we experience throughout our life have a great impact on our mental health. And if you go to a psychologist's office, the first thing they would ask is about your relationship with your parents, and it's about those relationships that can get broken, which really, I would say, distort in a way our relational capability. And it's not only the relationship with parents, relationship with siblings, with educators, with a lot of people that we meet in our lives, and especially people who matter for us, people who are important in our lives. So there is this, there are many studies in psychology that positive relationships and love and connections, they make the stresses of life more tolerable. So one thing was the first one, right? That love and connections are really important for our mental health. The second aspect is that loving connections make life stresses more tolerable. In fact, they are the main contributor to help us move through the various stresses that we experience. And a third aspect is that loving relationships can also help people heal from trauma and from very difficult experiences. And in that sense, loving relationships refer not only to a romantic partner and to one's close family, but also a community. So it's this idea that belonging to to a loving community is helping people feel whole again, right? So there is this idea of wholeness that is associated with, because mental health is wholeness, right? And so feeling that we are not isolated, that we're not insignificant, that we matter. So I think that's really an important relationship between love and mental health. Now, one aspect that I would say is problematic and difficult in relationship with love and mental health is that sometimes relationships, and if we talk about codependent relationships, so when one of the partners has a mental health problem and they expect the other one to heal them with their love, right? So when we start feeding on other people's compassion, that's when I would say we experience the negative association between love and mental health, because love in that sense is almost like something that others take in order to feed themselves, and that makes it very difficult for those who share the love, right? Because that depletes them of their own life energy, because it's not an exchange. It needs to be an exchange in order to be healthy love relationship. So I think that in some ways, and we also see that in systems, right? In systems of care, and especially in healthcare, people who feel a lot of compassion for others, they tend to start feeling drained, and because we don't have yet, I would say, we don't have ways in which people can develop their compassion to the level that it's a renewable energy in a sense, right? So it's not something that I give, and now that I gave it, it's gone and I'm burnt out and exhausted. So there is something about these systems in which people start protecting themselves, because the more they feel for others, the more difficult their job becomes. And that leads to what we call compassion fatigue, and or empathy fatigue as well, when people disconnect from that capacity to feel as a protection mechanism. And I think a lot of us do that because it's almost unconscious. We don't want to suffer. And because we don't want to suffer, we don't want to take too much of other people's suffering, which will really, drain ourselves in everything that happens. And we see that even in the world that we are experiencing right now, with many people wanting to just disconnect from everything that is going on because it's too much, it's too overwhelming. So I read this interesting idea in Joan Halifax, who is a writer, and she's also a Buddhist nun, and she talks about that compassion that needs to be developed so as it becomes like an open door, right? So she talks about having this resource that you share with others, and you have an open door through which it circulates, right? That it's not just a container that will be depleted. And she talks about certain practices of compassion and self-compassion as well, in order to develop our ability to be with the suffering of others without protecting ourselves too much. If we protect ourselves too much, then we contribute to systems that are not based on love and compassion, and that increases suffering. So it's almost like we are on this, I would say, a system in which we keep increasing suffering because we don't know what to do with it.
Yeah. No, that speaks to me a lot, because I think, I grew up in a generation where, the news is now bombarded at us from everywhere all the time. And I know from a young age, I became aware that I was trying to turn off, or became, apathy starting to take over, or that kind of thing. And my own, spiritual prayer was often, even though I know it was harder to be that way, but to keep, I called it keeping my heart soft. So like letting those things come in still, and not being hardened to the world. And I think it connects very much to what you're saying right there, but also where you finish the book. which I think is really just a beginning. When we were preparing this, I told you, I think this chapter is the chapter that kind of opens the door, but there's much more that can be said there. And yeah, you talk about, it's really, you talk about bringing this love to the whole world, and how do we, now that we've worked on ourselves and on our close relations, but now how do we even open up even more to the world? And it's really a small question, but it's really a very big question of, how can we love the whole world? How can we expand this to the whole world? And obviously, you know, like I said, just beginning of answers, but I think that you have some very interesting reflections on that. I think that many would like to hear.
You know, now that you ask your question, I think that's a really big question. Did I actually answer that in the book?
No, like, but you know, you talk about or basically in the title, you know, right? Global compassion is more what, but yes, yeah, I like it. I think you're starting to, but I think it's really a journey to keep going on.
Yeah, so I think it is something, you know, going from, and I appreciate how you went from the question of mental health and into the question of love in action, because instead of protecting ourselves from our capacity to feel for others, we need, in a way, to enhance our capacity to feel. So it's moving through that discomfort, you know, in order to reach a place where it gets better, right? So it's almost like, yes, it's really hard for a while, but then it gets better. And I think that once we reach that capacity to, I would say, to love people and to love all living beings, regardless of certain conditions that we put, or just loving people in our circle. And I think this is one of the necessary ethics for our times, because we live in this global world in which we are aware of what happens to other people who are not in our circle, they are not in our community, and we still feel for them, we still care for them. And I think that working on that capacity to connect to our shared humanity, you know, because once we live in that shared humanity, and I think that Parker Palmer refers to this as our hidden wholeness, we already feel connected to all living beings, and from that space of sensing that connection with all people and all living beings, we can slowly start, I would say, cultivating our capacity to feel. And that shared humanity, I think, that develops as we hear more stories, as we listen to others, as we travel, or we watch films, or we read books about other cultures, about other experiences. There is something that develops in us, which is, we receive in our inner world, you know, others, and we start understanding how they live, how they see the world, and that shifts our perspective a little bit, makes it larger. So I think that love has that, I would say, in a way, transformative capacity. One is to sense the interconnectedness, and then I would say the second one, which is more difficult, is moving love into action, because it's not only about feeling. And this is where it's also difficult for me, because I was in a dilemma. Okay, so I came to the conclusion that we need to feel more, not less. But now that we feel more, what do we do with what we feel? And this is related to a project that we started at the university, which is called the Activating the Heart Project, which asks questions about how we can create a sense of wholeness in who we are, and connect our capacity to think with our capacity to feel, and the capacity to act out in the world, and to make the right decisions, and to do the right things. So I think it comes to this idea of, once we sense, and global compassion refers to this capacity to sense the suffering in the world, and to want to do something about it. So it's this doing something about it that requires, it's almost like a movement, you know. We notice people, right? We see a lot of experiences, we start feeling things, And now it comes back from the heart again to the head of, oh, we need to think of what we can do, and we need to put in place our creative capacities to do something. So I think that this helps us, or cultivating more our capacity to love leads us to have heart-based responses to the world. And I think that once we have these heart-based responses to the world, I think we act in a more ethical way, right? So I think that our actions are guided by questions of, how do I feel about this? How do other people feel? How can I work to undo injustice that causes suffering? That's why we fight injustice, because of the suffering it creates. And that's why we try to create systems that are thinking of the well-being of all people involved, not just those in power, not just those who are valued according to certain social standards, but creating that ability to include everyone. And in the last chapter, when I talk about love in action, I talk about 3 different aspects. One is the global compassion, which is that some scholars refer to it as the necessary ethic of our time. And I think John Kabat-Zinn talks about this idea of planetary, he calls it planetary consciousness, this idea that we are already connected through the internet to all the experiences. We need also to connect in our heart to all these experiences that we witness. And the 2 other aspects that I talk about are Gandhi's idea of love as force of the soul, as the power of the soul to transform. And this has been a big mystery for me, because in learning about nonviolent activism, I was always fascinated of that capacity to love your enemies. Because I thought, okay, I understand loving your friends is okay, loving others, okay, we'll work on that. But now how can I love my enemies and transform those people through my love? Now that's something that I cannot really grasp. and I was trying to grasp through studying more about these nonviolent activism and Gandhi's idea of the force of the soul, which is about, I would say, responding to forms of suffering, but not in the immediate reactive way, which we will do. If I experience violence, I want to protect myself and act violently against that violence. But once we take a step back and remove ourselves, and this goes against our human nature, so it's a really big exercise in developing our consciousness, because it means that we stay with that suffering and discomfort that is caused by the violence that we experience, and we transform that into a form of love that can come out in the world and change it, not just respond, because we know that responses with violence to violence increase violence. So instead of creating a ripple effect of violence, we create a ripple effect of positive response, and then maybe the violence is reduced in some way. So that is the hope. So that was the second aspect of love in action that I mentioned. And the third one is this idea of love and knowledge, which means holistic knowledge. It means the capacity to sense the wholeness of other people. And it relates to this. I was reading Braiding Sweetgrass, a book written by an indigenous writer, and she talks about the difference between studying biology in our Western system and studying plants in her own way of understanding, where you don't ask a plant, what are you, but you ask a plant, who are you, right? So it's about, I think that love as holistic knowledge is about a relational way of knowing, right? As I know something, I'm also transformed in that knowing. I'm not the same, because as I start to know something, I enter a relationship with that something or with that someone. So there is something about that idea that I think is also an aspect that we highlight in our school, which is about that transformative capacity of knowledge, which doesn't only mean that now I know more ideas, but as I engage with some people, as I engage with some ideas, I am being transformed in that process, and I'm starting to be in a different way in relationship to the world.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you. I will stop with my questions here, but we really would love to open it. I'll invite Mikael back with us. And if you have questions, just to feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand and you can ask them out loud as well.
Yeah, exactly. We'll start a 15-minute period of a Q&A. So everybody who's ready to jump, just raise your hand. Well, in front of the camera using the Zoom option or in the chat.
I think Asta has a question.
Yeah. Would you like to share your comment with us, Asta, and then Francine, you can jump in.
Thank you. And congrats again, Bianca. I'm so excited for you and for the world to have access to this information. So my question lies, I'm trying to clarify a prejudice I have against one of my family members. So I'm wondering, based on the concept of relationship to connection, relationship to pleasure, based on your research, would you consider asexuality a mental health issue, or is that just somebody's personal preference?
Well, that's a really tough question, I would say, because some choices that we make and some definitions that we give to the way we feel are true for ourselves in a certain moment in our life, right? That can be because it's a very conscious choice. It reflects a really full knowing of our capacities and our potential, or it can be the result of a traumatic experience or of some form of what I call negative learning, when that leads us into a certain form of perception. So, and that can require work. And so it's very hard to know. And I think it's very subjective. It depends a lot on how a person feels and whether they think that this is who I am and I cannot be more than that. Because of my ideas about human potential, I always think that I can be more than I think I am. I can feel more than I think I can feel. I can sense more than I think I can sense. So, but that's my own personal, maybe because I value this capacity of human potential and development. But I would say that if it's a conscious choice and if it's a definition in full self-awareness, then it may be true to the person, and it's something that should be valued and accepted in the social world.
Francine.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Congratulations, Bianca. I'm so excited for you. I don't know that I have a question that relates directly to the book per se, but a lot of things resonated that you talked about. The unconditional regard for, like what Carl Rogers talked about, just kind of came to my mind as you were talking about, that sort of global love. So yeah, I want to do whatever I can, my little part in the world, to make that sort of happen, I guess. But I'm interested in how would you say writing this book was transformative for you?
Well, I think I would say that the whole process, right, of studying all these topics was transformative. And I wrote the book in the first months of the pandemic, hidden away in my room and dreaming of living in a different way, And I think that it was almost for me like this series of discoveries that I made through research, the discovery of self-compassion, the discovery of erotic intelligence, and the association between sexuality and spirituality, which was new for me. the discovery of the emotional intelligence framework, right? So it was this a growth process for me in understanding and accessing these concepts that I was able to put together in a book. And it almost felt like, oh, okay, now I can breathe, because now I put together what I knew and what was important for me. I put it in one place and I can share it with others. And that felt very meaningful. I think that it was also very difficult in a sense, because putting yourself out in the world is about vulnerability and becoming exposed. Like my colleague said, you're afraid that people will actually read your book now. So it was, I think that the whole experience of learning that happened was transformative for me, I would say. It brought me to a very different concept of, or very different way of relating to myself, to others, and to the world. Thank you for that question. Karen, do you want to go next?
Yeah, hello. It's so nice to see you.
It's good to see you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I love listening to you, and I love how I've attended your courses, obviously, in the past, and they've just been really transformative for me. And just the way, I love how you, I feel like you approach things, you know, and you've researched this topic. With that said, I wanted to know how or where you are in your journey since you've written the book, like in terms of love and compassion for yourself and acceptance, I guess, of yourself or other, or has anything changed? You know what I mean? Like,
yes, that's very interesting, because we talk about transformation in these general terms. Yes, that the learning was transformative in a sense that it opened new ways of understanding. And then I would say that there is also something about, and I think that it helped me experience a personal transformation in terms of having more courage. It's still something that I work on, right? So feeling more authentic, right? And being able to, as I said before, to feel at home in myself and not to be in a constant conflict with myself. That's very helpful. I would say it allows me to do other things than just spend a lot of time fighting with myself. It also helped me in, I would say, being more hopeful and having a sense of purpose and direction, because I start seeing more of that association between knowing, you know, and my learning process and my capacity to actually love, you know, others and love the world in general, because it's, I would say that there is that sense of interconnectedness that I can tap into more often than before, that I'm able to feel connected to others in a different way and maybe guide my behavior according to that perception. And also feeling a sense of safety in the world. I would say that, oh, I'm not this little thing thrown out in an insignificant universe who doesn't care about me. You know, I feel almost like, okay, so I am part of something, of a wisdom larger than myself. And my role is to try and allow this wisdom to maybe guide my actions. So there is something about that as well.
okay, thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you. Patrick, you have a question or a comment?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for organizing this. It's pretty cool. So you talked a lot about how we sometimes, I guess, have to unlearn some of the things we've learned when it comes to love, and that maybe society is not built in the best way to support that idea of sharing more compassion and sharing more love. And I was curious to know if you had looked at the concepts of amatonormativity and relationship anarchy in your readings or reflections, or even in that book.
So could you please say again the first term?
Sure.
First.
Amatonormativity.
Okay.
Which is a little bit like heteronormativity, but it's more related to relationship and like romantic relationships, as opposed to being in a heterosexual, like, you know what I mean? It's the same as heterosexual versus homosexual, but just for the concept of being in a relationship with someone in a romantic way.
Okay. Well, it's interesting that I didn't hear this particular term, although I did refer to the, I would say, the domination of our romantic myth, you know, in all our definitions of love, and that association that we make constantly between love, association with romantic love. And it's almost like a lot of people get bogged down in that type of love, and they try to fix it, and they try to experience it, and it's almost like they forget that there are all these other forms of love that can be experienced, that can be developed. Because
so that's exactly it. That's the term for
it. Okay, so thank you. I'm gonna look it up, because I did not know that there was a word for it. I just used a cluster of words, or, you know, to refer to this concept.
You're already on the way to write the second edition, Bianca.
Thank you, Patrick.
Does anyone? Oh, Miriam, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Well, and for this opportunity, and thank you and congratulations, Bianca. I think the book is a profound work, and you've described well about how all those aspects of love have come together. And I, of course, particularly love the way you pulled it together in the end. And the echoes for me, maybe this is the next edition. And they're beginning to be more visible articles and things written about love and leadership. And I can't help but think that so much of what is in your book lays a track for how we lead, both from the inner and outer realms, which of course is at the heart of transformative leadership and spirituality. And so I was really excited with some of the comments too in the chat, because to me, that was percolating also underneath. And so I just want to hold that up, because my own curiosity and leanings about what's happening in the world today and the paucity of leadership, and what would happen if we really brought some of these things together. And that's what we saw coming across in our newsreels. So, you know, a little idealism there for sure, but I think, you know, you open up something, a path that would be very interesting for folks to follow, making that connection, that profound connection, more strongly between those aspects of love and leadership. So next round. Thank you, Bianca.
Thank you, Miriam. I really appreciate what you say, because I think that even for me, it was a journey in which I could talk about love and leadership without that sense of, oh, I'm committing a taboo, you know, associating these two words together, and then a lot of people will frown and think I'm crazy, or they would think that I'm this person out there and I don't know what I'm saying. But there is this I think it's so important, because if we return to the definition of love as the care for the life and growth of that which we love, if we can develop leadership that starts from that, and there are many people who actually are leaders based on that, and with that grounding in their active leadership or taking leadership, I think that and I would say doing it intentionally and knowing what it is and knowing how to develop it and how to get the right resources to be able to do that, because that's hard work. right? It's very difficult to do, I would say, to be a leader who works from that place. So yes, thank you. That's something for me to reflect on as well.
Well, thank you, Bianca. Thank you, everyone, for being there. Thank you for this wonderful, that's a start. I mean, we're talking about the second edition, but let's celebrate the first. And again, we want to honor, to celebrate this book, this wonderful output that you're making, that you're sharing with the world, and especially with us within the St. Paul University community, Bianca. And if you like what you heard and you're not that familiar with St. Paul University, well, know that the admission are open for our master. So if you want to be part of the Master in Transformative Leadership and Spirituality or the Graduate Diploma in Transformative Leadership and Spirituality, you can send your application. Just look at the St. Paul webpage. And also, if you just want to have let's say, a bigger input or to learn more about Bianca's work, you can read the book, but you can also be part of the well-being, leadership and well-being workshops she will be giving this winter. So again, go, I think you have thank you, Gabrielle. You have the link in the chat if you want to have a look about this workshop or to register to it. And that's all. I think in the name of the Providence School of Transformative Leadership and Spirituality, I really want to wish you a great Christmas season. And we hope to see you next January for more webinars to come. So thank you very much for being there. Thank you for Gabrielle, who took care to set up all this wonderful activity, and for Bianca, who was always so generous about her thoughts with all of us.
Thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate having you here. Thank you.